Howdy folks, Tex Grebner here with Tex Grebner Outdoors. Hope you guys are ready to make it weird because it's time for your Tex Grebner Outdoors Saturday morning cartoon awesomeness. If you want to support the channel, you can go to texgrebneroutdoors.com. Check out the Kill with Stick shirt, the Make It Weird shirt, Make It Weird sticker, and of course, life ain't like the pornos, hunting ain't like the TV shows. If you're a bow hunter and you want a discount on your archery supplies, you can go to threeriversarchery.com. Use the discount code in your checkout of Tex Grebner. It'll give you a discount on your shipping. Every little bit helps. Now, we're going to be making it weird because I'm not the world's greatest bow hunter, you might have noticed. And the truth is, a lot of you in my comments section have been commenting on what a shit bow hunter I am and how I should take up gathering. Well, I'm not particularly good at wild edible knowledge myself. So I enlisted the help of Bexy Bones from Instagram, and you can find her down in the description, and I hope you guys are going to enjoy this video.
What you've got growing over here by the barbed wire fence are wild raspberries, and you can usually tell the difference between the raspberries and the blackberries because the raspberries usually have bright green stems on the first year's growth and then kind of a reddish stem, whereas blackberries are more like a thick, shiny, sort of reddish color. They're flowering right now, but if you can manage to get here before the birds, you can get some nice berries. Probably not enough to make a cobbler, but I mean, if you want a snack. This is Salsify, and it's a little hard to spot in a pasture like this because it kind of looks like a lot of the grasses, but it'll be a lot easier when these start to open up and you get these giant dandelion-like puffball seed heads. Just like dandelion puffballs, only much bigger, more like the size of a, less like a golf ball and more like a wiffle ball. But what you really want is the root down here, and you pull it up and it's this bright white, and it's a really savory ingredient for stews and things. I always try to rhyme salsify with satisfy, that's how I remember what it's for. I actually did uproot one. This is a much bigger one. And right now it's exuding a milky sap, which usually tells you that it's probably not going to taste that great. Most people, when they forage salsify, they wait until the first frost because it's usually kind of got a cleaner taste and it's had more time to get more of a bigger root. This is kind of puny by comparison. But once it's this big, it's a lot easier to spot. This stuff down here is garlic mustard, which is a very invasive weed. And right now it's in the seed stage. So it's probably not going to taste very good. You can eat the root, but I really prefer the flowers, the flower heads before they reach the seed phase. And I thought I saw one. Oh, darn it. Oh, here we go. I'm going to reach over the scary fence. But when it's in the flower phase, when this whole thing is white instead of all these little seed pods, the flower is edible and it's really good. And you can eat it all you want because it's invasive, so no worry about sustainably harvesting it. This stuff right here, like the raspberries over there, it's kind of a bush crop. It's wild gooseberries. They do have nasty thorns, but at this phase they're still green and kind of bendy, so you don't have to worry about it. But there's some of the berries down here. I just pick those off. They're still too young, but you can see that. Now, gooseberries don't taste very good on their own. You usually have to make them into like jams or jellies, otherwise they just don't taste like much of anything, just kind of sour juice. But once they get bigger, and some are green, some are red, once they get bigger and juicier, you get up a lot of them, you can get a really nice jam going. Let's see, there was lots of good stuff over here. You were talking about the multiflora rose. That's also an invasive weed. Right now it's not really, you can't do much with it, but if it flowers and gets rose hips, in the wintertime you can harvest those and it's a good source of vitamin C. You can add them to tea and stuff. This stuff down here is burdock, and the big leaves and the stalks don't really turn red, but to some people they might think that it's rhubarb. It's not rhubarb. But you can eat the root, especially on the second year plants where they're bigger. They're easy to spot in the wintertime because if you haven't cut them down, there's a giant stalk with these little burrs on it. They're about this big and they have all these little hooked barbs. And interestingly enough, those were actually the inspiration for Velcro. The guy who invented Velcro noticed how burrs from burdock stuck to people's clothes, and so he invented Velcro with the hook and eye system. But the burdock root is my favorite part to eat because you can shred it up with carrots and make a salad, a Japanese salad called kinkura, and it's really good. The leaves are edible, but only when young, when they're very first coming up, when they're only about like that big. Right now they have a little too much oxalic acid, the same thing that makes rhubarb leaves kind of poisonous and makes you sick. So right now, just leave it alone.
I am not a fan of burdock because if you get some burdock in your long johns and then you put them on the wrong side out, you're the first one to know about it.
This is something that you'll find in a lot of wild prairies and pastures. This is yarrow. And it's usually pretty easy to spot because when it's surrounded by long, leafy, grassy plants like this, it's got really ferny, deeply cut leaves. The scientific name is Achillea millefolium, and millefolium basically translates to 1,000 leaves. And that's why they call it that, because it's just these tiny little, really finely cut leaves. And so it looks kind of ferny, which stands out in a big pasture like this. And then the flowers are usually yellow, sometimes white in the wild. You can find them at garden centers in fancier colors like pink and purple. But you can actually, if you've got a cut when you're out in the woods and you want to help staunch the bleeding, you can take these leaves and kind of squish them up in your hands and rub them on the wound, maybe make a little poultice or a bandage, and it'll help stop the bleeding faster. This is wild grapevine, and it's not an invasive weed, but it's invasive in the way that it'll climb on just about anything. And it's easy to spot because it's got the classic grape leaf, and not yet because it's still pretty early into spring, but when June goes further along, it'll be probably covered in Japanese beetles. They love to eat the leaves. And you can kind of see the little grapes forming on there. And they're kind of like gooseberries in that they don't taste very good right off of the vine, but if you wanted to make like a juice or a jam, they'd be great for that. They're very juicy. And another thing that's over here, there's quite a bit of it. Some people call it sticky jack, but I call it cleavers. And they call it sticky jack because it will stick to things like crazy. Not just these little burr parts, these little tiny seed parts, but the whole thing. It's just covered in a fine sort of Velcro-y substance. And it's not so much for out-of-hand eating, but it's a great tonic. Like if you're not feeling very good and you want to make a tea or a salad out of it, it would be great for that. This is stinging nettle, and if you've ever had the misfortune to brush up against one with your bare skin, you know why it's called that. You'll get this hive-like rash. I don't have one because I didn't touch it. But we'll get a close-up shot where you can see it's covered in tiny hypodermic needles that are filled with this nasty poison that gets under your skin as soon as you brush up against it. And it causes hives, but the only good thing about it is that the hives don't last for very long most of the time. They're itchy and red and inflamed for about an hour or two, and then after that, it's not like poison ivy. It doesn't stick around on your skin or your clothes. It gets under your skin, it irritates you, and then it's done. But you can actually eat it. And if you're going to eat it, you want to prepare it kind of like spinach, and you really only want to, with gloves of course, pinch off the first inch and a half of the plant because that's the tender part and it's less likely to have the stingers on it. I've heard people say you can eat it fresh. I wouldn't dare, but I boil it like spinach and I make a soup out of it, like a stinging nettle potato bacon soup, and it's really good. This is a plant that probably everybody in the Midwest or just the Great Plains area of the United States knows about, and that's mulberry trees. They're considered a waste tree because they pretty much just pop up wherever because the birds eat the berries and poop them out on your car, fence, rooftop. This is actually a pretty good example of the mulberry tree because it's growing along the barbed wire fence. It's pretty much just right up next to it. And they pop up there a lot, and if you don't cut them down, they can like basically swallow the fence. But these are the immature berries, And you don't want to eat these because they do have intoxicating properties. And the young leaves are edible, but the older leaves aren't. And the way that you can tell if they're okay to eat, you want to cook them first, of course, is you pick it off, and if you squeeze the stem, if there's no milky sap, like when you snap off a poinsettia leaf in the wintertime, if you see that milky sap, then you know you don't want to eat it. But you can see for this one, it's not. It's just clear. So if you were to cook these up, you could actually eat them. I've never tried one. And I don't recommend waiting until these get older just so you can have a trip in the woods, so to speak. The berries are a nutritional powerhouse, and they make a great snack while you're tromping around in the woods. We've been talking a lot about plants that you can eat or that you can take home and cook and prepare to eat, but I wanted to take a minute to talk about a plant that you should avoid at all costs. This is wild parsnip, and a lot of people know the plants that irritate your skin, like stinging nettle and poison ivy. Those are kind of common knowledge, but this is just kind of coming up on a lot of people's radars because they're running into it, unfortunately. The big plant like this is easy to spot, but basically you rub up against it or you chop it and the sap gets on you, and it won't burn right away, but if you're exposed to sunlight after you have it on yourself, on your skin, it'll burn you. It'll look and feel like blisters and burns. So it basically makes your skin extremely sensitive to sunlight. And like I said, the big plant like this is pretty easy to spot with all these leaflets and this long grooved stem, and the flower is pretty easy to spot too. It's like Queen Anne's lace, but it's yellow. It's that bright umbel. But the smaller plants, basically you have to look for the leaves. They kind of look like, if you've ever seen a celery plant actually leaf out completely, they look a lot like that. And you can actually see some of it coming up here and some smaller plants coming up over there. But if you need to spot whether or not it's in a giant field, if it hasn't flowered yet, you want to look for the leaf. But if it has flowered, I mean, you can see it's just about damn near everywhere. This is a nice stand of white pine trees, and it's not really something that you can eat. I've heard that you can eat the very tip tops where it's nice and green, new needles coming out. But what I did this winter, and a lot of people have done for nutrient deficiencies and just kind of like a vitamin C boost in the winter or otherwise, is they take white pine needles, and you can tell these from other pine needles because they're very long and skinny, and you submerge them in boiling water for about 5 to 10 minutes. You don't want it boiling while the needles are in there. You want it to be, heat it to boiling and then turn it off. And then let them steep in there for about 5 to 10 minutes and strain it. And it's a really nice kind of hay-flavored, grassy sort of tea that has a huge amount of vitamin C. So it's a nice nutrient boost in the winter and otherwise. We weren't able to get up close to any cattails because the water level was lower before last night and it drenched us with rain. But in the middle of the pond, you can see there's a whole grouping of cattails. And cattails are a forager's delight because you can eat just about every part of the plant. The rhizome can be cooked like a starch. The stem can be peeled and eat that. I've heard people call them water corn dogs, not just because of the way they look, but apparently you can batter and fry the seed head and eat that. But Tex informed me that you can use, once you've stripped the cotton off of the cattail seed head, you can use the stick as a hand drill to start a fire. But he also informed me that you would probably be better off just taking the cotton from the cattail and stuffing your clothes with it to stay warm, because it would have to be dry to be used as a hand drill. And since cattails grow near water, you're going to have a pretty hard time getting a fire started with a wet cattail stem.
I know that I learned a hell of a lot more than I knew to start with when it comes to wild forage, and I'm still not that great. However, I'm curious if you guys would be interested in another collaboration video, but this one more geared toward deer forage plants that are naturally going to occur out in the woods, so that you can figure out where deer are organically going to gravitate toward to set up better tree stand ambushes, just as part of general fieldcraft knowledge, because having an understanding is half the battle. I hope you guys have enjoyed watching this week's episode. As always, God bless all my sportsmen of America. Join the NRA to protect our rights. Please check out my friends over at threeriversarchery.com. Thank you very much, those of you involved in law enforcement and those of you serving in the military. And thanks for watching Tex Grebner Outdoors.